All right, turn to 1 Kings chapter 8, if you're not there already, for lesson 35. King Solomon's Wealth and Fame. That's its title. We saw the building of the temple. We saw the dedication of the temple. We know that Solomon is a wise man because he chose wisdom. God also gave him riches and honor and peace. And we want to take a look at some of those riches and honor that King Solomon was given. Okay? So, at the end of chapter 8, there's 4 verses that we want to read. Start at verse 62. So 1 Kings chapter 8, starting at verse 62. We are in the midst of, we would sometimes say, the holiday season. We just celebrated Thanksgiving. Soon we'll be celebrating the birth of Christ. The people living back then had great celebrations and feasts too, where they wanted to get together with God's people, to have feasts and to be able to celebrate. And we'll see just how much celebrating and feasting was going on at the time of the dedication of the temple. The people were probably proud of it. And the people were happy and thankful for it, at least those who love the Lord. Verse 62. And the king and all Israel with him offered sacrifice before the Lord. And Solomon offered a sacrifice of peace offerings, which he offered unto the Lord, 22,000 oxen and 120,000 sheep. So the king and all the children of Israel dedicated the house of the Lord. The same day did the king hallow the middle of the court that was before the house of the Lord. For there he offered burnt offerings and meat offerings and the fat of the peace offerings, because the brazen altar that was before the Lord was too little to receive the burnt offerings and meat offerings and the fat of the peace offerings. And at that time Solomon held a feast, and all Israel with him a great congregation, from the entering in of Hamath unto the river of Egypt, before the Lord our God, 7 days and 7 days, even 14 days. On the 8th day he sent the people away, and they blessed the king and went unto their tents joyful and glad of heart, for all the goodness that the Lord had done for David and his servant and for Israel his people. That is an amazing amount of animals that needs to be sacrificed on that altar of burnt offering. 22,000 oxen, 120,000 sheep. There wasn't enough time to do all of these sacrifices by the priests in the normal way. So what we read there is that Solomon goes back to the laws of God all the way back in Leviticus. And there God had prepared a way for the people to offer sacrifices, their own sacrifices. And so what did Solomon do? There was not going to be enough priests or enough time or enough altars to offer this many sacrifices. And the people had hearts that were overflowing with giving. So what did Solomon do? He took a place in the outer courtyard and he made it a holy place where sacrifices could also be offered, and that the people were made pure before God, he prayed. And the people too were then given permission to offer sacrifices there on those altars too in the middle of the courtyard, because there just wasn't going to be enough time or manpower to offer all of these sacrifices. Okay? So we read of 14 days of celebration. The first 7 days was the dedication of the temple, and then Solomon sent the people. And when it says tents, that doesn't mean he sent them back to their homes, because many of their homes were adobe or brick or wood and mud homes now. They're permanent. No, he sent them to go live in their tents. Those tents were a picture of the tabernacle and of the people wandering in the wilderness and living in tents. So they went and celebrated that. There was great feasting. There was great joy. Gladness of heart, just like we might experience at a time at like a Thanksgiving or a Christmas dinner with our loved ones, our cousins, aunts and uncles, grandparents, brothers and sisters, parents, and all others. We enjoy that time. Now, take a look at 1 Kings chapter 9. We have some more communication here between Solomon and the Lord, and it's important for us because, again, it's going to point us to that idea of the covenant that we talked about last time. 1 Kings chapter 9. And it came to pass when Solomon had finished the building of the house of the Lord and the king's house, and all Solomon's desire which he was pleased to do, that the Lord appeared to Solomon the second time, as he had appeared unto him at Gibeon. And the Lord said unto him, I have heard thy prayer and thy supplication, that thou hast made before me. I have hallowed this house which thou hast built, to put my name there forever, and mine eyes and mine heart shall be there perpetually. And if thou wilt walk before me, as David thy father walked, in integrity of heart, and in uprightness, to do according to all that I have commanded thee, and wilt keep my statutes and my judgments, then I will establish the throne of thy kingdom upon Israel forever, as I promised to David thy father, saying, there shall not fail thee a man upon the throne of Israel. But if ye shall at all turn from following me, ye or your children, and will not keep my commandments and my statutes which I have set before you, but go and serve other gods and worship them, then will I cut off Israel out of the land which I have given them, and this house which I have hallowed for my name will I cast out of my sight, and Israel shall be a proverb and a byword among thy people. And at this house which is high, every one that passeth by shall be astonished, and shall hiss, and they shall say, why hath the Lord done this unto this land and to this house? And they shall answer, because they forsook the Lord their God, who brought forth their fathers out of the land of Egypt, and have taken hold upon other gods, and have worshipped them and served them. Therefore hath the Lord brought upon them all this evil. So God comes to Solomon, and he tells Solomon a few things. Solomon, I have hallowed this temple. It's a proper and good place. It's a hallowed place. It's a place where the people are to worship the Lord. It's holy. Be reverent here in my house. He also promised that he would always be in that house. My heart and my eyes shall be there. I won't abandon it and leave you alone there, but I will be there with you. Important words for us when we go to God's house. To be reverent in God's house. To honor God's house. God is there with us, just as He is everywhere with us. And then He promised to keep that covenant that I established with the lines of generations, and even with David thy father, I promise to continue to keep that covenant. Okay? I will not abandon my people. However, if the people of this land do not obey me, they begin to maybe worship other gods, or they begin to ignore the worship of the Lord, then this beautiful temple that you have built, it will be destroyed. Okay? And then this temple will be nothing more than a building for the wicked to mock. Look at that falling down. That was a great structure at one time, but those people, they only had a little zeal for the Lord for a few years after they built it, and then it fell away. Then they went back to their old ways, their idols and other gods, and now look at that temple. It's in disarray. It's nothing. That God must be nothing. And that's what the people would say. And we know that will come true when the people are taken off to Babylon. God's Solomon's beautiful temple that's built here is destroyed. All right, Solomon had some other building projects. Okay? He had some other building projects. We won't read through all of these verses, but he built another place, a place called the House of the Forest of Lebanon. Okay? Wasn't in Lebanon, but Lebanon was an area around the land of Canaan that had cedar trees. And the cedar trees that were used to build this great part to his palace was built out of cedar trees from Lebanon. So it was called the House of the Forest of Lebanon. And it was built as an arsenal, a place to hold the swords and the spears, maybe parked the chariots. And also Solomon had gold shields that were mounted in that house probably to display the glory of the people. Maybe had beautiful carvings on each one. So these golden shields were stored here, as well as all the other weapons for war. Okay? Outside would be other chambers and rooms for probably the storage of other things. Maybe some of the rooms would be, maybe they were ornately decorated so that when guests would come from other lands, this is a place where Solomon, well, why don't you have this room here? It's a beautiful room. So that room, those rooms would surround it. He built apartments or small palaces or rooms around the palace for his wives. Specifically, we read specially, he made special rooms for his wife who was from Egypt. Okay? Problem was he had too many wives. Okay? And these buildings weren't just, cobbled together. Again, these were built out of beautiful stones that were brought in and stacked. Beautiful columns and pillars, gold and wood, carved, beautiful tapestries. Nothing as beautiful as the house of God, as the temple, but still beautiful nonetheless, and big and grand. What a place to stay if we could only have seen it. Okay? Read verses, or turn to chapter 10, and I'm going to start at verse 26. There's a few verses here in which we see what else Solomon builds, and then what he gets in return for building that. Verse 26 of chapter 10, and Solomon gathered together chariots and horsemen, and he had 1,400 chariots, 12,000 horsemen, whom he bestowed in the cities for chariots, and with the king of Jerusalem. And the king made silver to be in Jerusalem as stones, and cedars made he to be as sycamore trees that are in the vale for abundance. And Solomon had horses brought out of Egypt and linen yard, and the king's merchants received the linen yarn at a price. Okay? And the chariot came up out of Egypt for 600 shekels of silver, and an horse 150. And so for all the kings of the Hittites and the kings of Syria did they bring them out by their means. He was rich. He was wealthy. Okay? Beyond what we think of means and measures. Let's see, what's another place? Go back another chapter to chapter 9, the last 3 verses there, we see even more things. And King Solomon made a navy of ships in Ezion Geber, which is beside Eloth, on the shore of the Red Sea in the land of Edom. And Hiram sent in the navy his servants, shipmen that had knowledge of the sea with the servants of Solomon, and they came to Ophir and fetched from thence gold, 420 talents, and brought it to the king. So he had this magnificent navy. And they brought to him all kinds of things. Okay, we read later on that they came with gold and silver and ivory and spices and apes and peacocks. And these things were put into all the palaces of Solomon all around. Okay? That's how wealthy and how rich and how grand Solomon's palace was. And finally, we have the story of the Queen of Sheba. She probably had heard from some of these ships and travelers and men coming from the land of Solomon, and they would tell her, "Oh, queen, 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 you are rich. You are rich, but you should see King Solomon's palace. You should see the temple. You should see all the things that he has there." The Queen of Sheba, being wealthy herself, thought, well, yes, all kings are wealthy, and when I travel to other lands, I'm amazed too. So these guys are probably, they're just amazed at it all because it's different. But it's probably not all that much different than any of the other kings and countries and palaces that I've been to. They're all grand. They all look great. But I shall go for myself because I keep hearing it. And I shall ask this man, this King Solomon, some questions. I will put some riddles to him. And so she goes and she meets King Solomon. I'm sure there was someone sent a messenger ahead to tell King Solomon she was coming so that he could prepare a house and place for her. And when she arrives, she asks him her riddles and her questions, and King Solomon gives satisfactory answers to each of them because he is a wise man. But then when she goes around and sees for herself the palaces, the temple, the forest of the house of Lebanon, and all of the possessions that Solomon has, and the beauty and the grandeur of it all, she shakes her head and she tells the men that are with her, "Men, I thought you had told me everything. I thought I knew what was going on. I am wrong. Not even the half was told me as much as what Solomon has here. Your words didn't even describe half of it. What a magnificent and large and massive place." Something that we may someday experience, maybe if we were to go to the majestic Rocky Mountains. And Mom and Dad may have explained it to you. And you may have seen it in pictures and videos. You may have discussed it. But until you're there and you stand and from all the way to the left and all the way as far as your eye can see in the right, the grandeur of the mountains and how tall and majestic and beautiful they are, and then to go walk in among them and to see the grandeur of it all, no words can describe, not even pictures can describe just how good it is until we get there in person. And so, the Queen of Sheba, it says she blessed God. King Solomon gave her, the Queen gave Solomon an abundance of gifts. And he responded by, "I'll give you anything you want, up to half of the kingdom." So they traded gifts with one another, and she goes home. But what's probably more amazing and what's more important that we can take from it, we can learn from her, is that she listened to Solomon. Solomon was the wisest man on the face of the earth. And the Queen of Sheba had probably gone around and heard some pretty wise men. Some foolish ones as well. But she had probably heard some wise men talk. Maybe the kings or maybe the king's wise men. But without a doubt, King Solomon was the wisest, most well-spoken, you can probably assume, men that she had ever talked to. And so she listened. She was impressed. Later on, Jesus uses that against the Pharisees. You won't even listen to God's word, and yet the Queen of Sheba realized that she needed to listen to the wisdom of Solomon, but you don't think you need to. The wisest man on this earth, and you don't think you need his words? Why, even the Queen of Sheba listened to him, and you won't. How much wiser than it would be for us too to do the same. We ought to listen to God's word and his laws. We ought to listen to the words in Proverbs that Solomon tells us, because if we don't think we need it, then we're just like the Pharisees who think that they didn't need it as well. So the Queen of Sheba goes home. You can imagine her trying to describe to the people there, and even they there would just have to shake their heads because they couldn't understand just how grand it was unless they went in person and saw it all. So God has greatly and richly blessed Solomon. He has wealth, he has honor, he has peace, and he has wisdom. All the things that the Lord has promised him. Now Solomon needs to teach his son right, and he needs to continue to obey the word of the Lord, and the Lord will continue to bless him in that way too. So again, that's a good reminder for us. When we obey God's law, we're not earning our own salvation. That's not possible. But when we obey God's law, what we are doing by walking right in his pathway, we show that we love the Lord, and the Lord will be kind and gracious unto us. But when we turn from the Lord, when we begin to walk far apart from him, then trouble comes, because the Lord wants to turn us, our hearts, back to him. So we can remember that too.